This registry just asks that property owners that have vacant buildings, commercial or industrial, register those buildings. There is a registration fee, and that just covers the time that's spent registering and inspecting and keeping up with the information. But the object of this ordinance was mainly to get information, because when buildings are not occupied, it's hard to a lot of times determine who owns, especially if it's held in a partnership or LLC. You don't know who to contact. They may be involved in doing something, rehabilitating the building or trying to get someone in it, but you don't often know that. So this allows us to get information on those buildings and find out what status they're in. There's 3 status positions that they can be in. One is that they're vacant, and if they're vacant, then we ask that they secure the building in a specific way and keep things up. If it's being actively marketed, that means that someone is listed with an agent, and it's listed in the MLS listings. So there's information out there for someone that might be interested in buying it. And thirdly, that they're rehabilitating the building, so they've got an active building permit. If they fall into any one of those 3 categories, then we still get information, but they're not required to pay the registration fee, and they're not considered at least in the 2 categories of actively marketing and rehabilitation, they're not considered vacant. November 4th, by close of business, is the deadline for registering, for getting in contact with us and giving us information on the building that we sent out a letter initially, just explaining the registration process and sending them a registration form. And by November 4th, by close of business, they need to have contacted our office and given us information on the status of their building. It's commercial industrial, but it does include multifamily, because multifamily is considered a commercial building, so it does include those. Right now, we've identified 142 vacant commercial industrial buildings that are within the area that this ordinance applies to. So it doesn't apply to the whole city. It just applies to a certain area, the redevelopment area, which would be everything just basically south of Parkway. It also includes the areas that are sub-areas in our master plan, which would be South Highland Corridor, from the river south to Rebel, and also the Old Hickory Mall area, Oman Arena. Those areas are included in there too. We've got 142 identified. Of that 142, we've received information on 28 that have identified their buildings as either being vacant, actively marketed, or are in some form of rehabilitation. We are in the process of verifying that information right now. So if those buildings are identified as meeting one of those categories, then we'll remove them from the actively vacant buildings, except for those that are boarded up. They'll be considered vacant. But the actively marketed and rehab will be removed from that for the time being. This registration lasts for 12 months. So at the end of 12 months, we'll send out another letter saying it's time to renew and give us information on the status now. If they're still being actively marketed, they can be given an extension, but it's not outright that they get it. It's not automatic. They have to show that during that 12-month period, the previous 12-month period, that they have had people in the building, they have had people looking at the building, that there's more than just listing it. Now, the first period, we give people time to actively market their building. But after that 12-month period, then the next 12 months, we need to make sure that they're doing something other than just listing it with an agent, that they're actually making progress and getting someone in the building. But as long as they stay in one of those exempted categories, then they won't have to pay the registration fee, and there's not really a whole lot they have to do. It's those that continue in a vacant state that the registration fee does go up the longer you stay in that state. And again, it's just to encourage those to find a way to occupy the building. But those that are actively marketing, rehabbing the building, doing the right things with their building, we'll basically understand that there's activity and there's things going on, and we're not trying to penalize those. For those that are vacant, we're not trying to penalize them either. We're just encouraging them to get someone in the building, or to at least be trying to get somebody in the building. The fee is to support the actions and the activities that are associated with inspecting and keeping up with the buildings, but it's very minimal. Again, if your building is in code compliance, the fee is split in half, so it goes down to $200 initially. But in most cases, we found that at least the people that have contacted us so far, either the building has been occupied, it wasn't vacant. If they're occupied, we remove them from the vacant building list. Some of them got in touch with us and said we're actively marketing our building. So again, in those two instances, occupied, actively marketing, rehabbing, they don't have to pay a fee, and we just basically keep track of the information and follow up just to keep an idea of where they are status-wise. But they don't have to do anything. So it's not burdensome. It's to help in these areas where we have vacant buildings that are causing other buildings to decrease in value. Because you can see, especially in the downtown area, if you've got a building that you're trying to have somebody occupy, and you've got one next to you that is just in some boarded up state, but not really taking care of the building, not really keeping utilities on. There's some problems that can occur with that, and it's kind of that broken windows concept, in that if you look down a street and you see 4 or 5 boarded up buildings, that doesn't give you a good feeling about the economic viability of that area. And if 1 or 2 buildings are next to a building that you own, it can start affecting your values and your abilities to attract people to your building. So again, it does have an impact, and it's just like anything else. When we have things that impact us economically or activity-wise, getting people down here in the downtown area, getting positive things happening, we try to do things to modify that so that we can see positive come out of that and not negative. In the Jackson Plaza, there's several buildings. So we have the service merchandise building, that's a separate building. We have the building that's on the other end that used to be like Upton's or Belk before they moved to the mall. It's a separate building, and then we have some lease spaces that are in that main. And if they're separated, or if they have a separate addresses, we consider that to be separate space. But again, all those buildings are a part of Jackson Plaza, so we do look at that as a development, but we also look at buildings that are very much separate and very much their own entity, as being carrying their own status. So we'll be addressing those buildings too, because that center has been vacant for the most part. Most of the space has been vacant for some time. The main thing is it gives us information we were lacking before, because some of the buildings we had no idea of what the property owners, what his actions were, what his intentions were. But this way we get, if they're actively marketed, we find out what the building is for sale for. So that gives us a price that if somebody's interested, they know that that's the asking price. Whereas before, we may not even know who to contact and find out even if they're marketing the building or if it's even for sale. So it gives us that information, and organizations like Jackson Downtown Development Corporation can use that information to pass on to people that come looking in the downtown area for space. So it helps everyone.